Ready for the best sleep of your life? Well, honestly, when was the last time you slept like you were 20? Well, it's time to meet sleep expert Mollie Eastman from Sleep is a Skill. And Mollie, she's such an expert because she's not only dealt with her own struggles with sleep, but she's created a whole business around it and coached so many other people with her knowledge and expertise. And she's the founder of the Sleep is a Skill website, and there's programs out there, but she's also the host of one of my favorite podcasts, the Sleep is a Skill podcast, which you're all going to have to go and listen to after this episode if you're not following her already. Now, Mollie uses technology, accountability, and she uses behavioral change to help everyone optimize their sleep. And she's trained in behavioral change techniques from the Nonverbal Group, Beyond Tells, and has a degree in psychology from Syracuse. And today we're going to focus on the sleep issues that women have during this menopause transition, like sleep disruptions, those 2 a.m. awakenings and difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. And what about those 4:30 a.m. wake ups and just can't go back to sleep again syndromes? She's going to talk about insomnia, sleep apnea, and so much more. So Mollie has got your back, and she's going to give us the reasons why we have difficulty sleeping during this transition and some of the solutions. But before we meet Mollie, I got to read this fancy disclaimer. The information and opinions provided in the podcast by Sleep is a Skill, LLC are not medical advice, do not create any type of medical relationship, and unless expressly stated, do not reflect the opinions of SIAS, its affiliates, subsidiaries, or sponsors, or the hosts, or any guests, employer, or affiliated professional organizations. No person should act or refrain from acting on the basis of content provided in any podcast or her website or mine without first seeking appropriate medical advice and counseling. No information provided in any podcast on or on her website should be used as a substitute for medical advice and counseling. SIAS, that means Sleep is a Skill, expressly disclaims any and all liability relating to any actions taken or not taken based on any or all contents of this website and any podcast. So finally, with that out of the way, let's meet Mollie Eastman. Welcome.
Zora, it's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I know you and I could just chat all day, every day. I feel like every time we connect, there's lots of buzz. So I'm really excited for today's conversation.
Oh, thank you. We have another podcast that we did already, so I'm going to have to put that one in the show notes where we covered a lot of cool sleep hacks and biohacks and all your knowledge as well. So, but today we're really going to focus on that menopausal woman. And to be honest, really, most of the women I think who are listening don't really care to be 20 again, but they care to have the sleep that they had when they were in their 20s, right? So let's dive into what are the most common sleep disturbances that women experience during this menopause transition. And I'm talking to a woman generally in her 40s and 50s. And why do they occur?
Yeah, absolutely. One, this is a very important group that has been overlooked for quite some time, but particularly the alarms have been sounding in recent years of looking at women over the age of about 40 and beyond for being a forgotten group in the area of sleep, particularly, and I think you and I have chatted about this a bit, but there's sleep apnea, but this can be in a big umbrella for sleep apnea, respiratory disturbances, which is, an element of course, what's happening with sleep apnea, the inability to breathe multiple points throughout the time that you're asleep. And that can also bring about other things, snoring, upper airway resistance syndrome, and often there can be kind of a swirl within that realm of this difficulty breathing. That could sound like, yeah, that's important, but let's talk about some other things. That is huge. And one of the most important things that if we're missing that, that in and of itself is like a sinking ship that we're trying to do all these other things and missing like the forest for the trees. And what we find is that right now for sleep, across the board, some of the stats are around 1 in 4 people having sleep apnea. But for women, the call out was that men had more of a prevalence of more of a tendency to have sleep apnea and women a little bit less. But it turns out that those stats change a bit as we age in different seasons of our life. And so post around 40, we start to even out in the instances of having sleep apnea. So we become much more akin to the male demographics for sleep apnea thereafter. So what we need to do about that is I would be a stand for a future where all of us are being tested for sleep apnea, not once, but multiple times throughout our lives, the same in alignment with the same way we all get tested for blood pressure multiple times throughout our lives. We wouldn't just get one reading and then make all kinds of decisions out of how we would be treating this. Sleep apnea can kind of fall in suit. So even if you have been tested, back in your whatever 20s, 30s, and you've got a clean bill of health as far as, oh, no sleep apnea here. Well, you can develop it later in life as some of those hormonal changes shift. And also as we deal with weight gain. So we know there's certain stats thrown around where, one out of, I believe it's from the Sleep Foundation, is if you gain, so say you gain around 10 extra pounds, so you can have around 6-time increase in the amount of instances of respiratory problems.
It's
for
huge.
Huge. So we want to
just
be
10 pounds. Sorry, just 10 pounds is not a lot to have such a serious problem. Sorry to interrupt you, but that's a crazy statistic.
Yes. So out of that, the increase in the amount of weight that we're putting on our bodies can absolutely flare up some of the instances of sleep apnea. So that is really, really important for us to be aware of as we have some of those changes. So that's one thing to call out. But beyond how we're breathing, then of course, many of us can come about issues with wake ups throughout the course of our night. We can come up against, just this sense of feeling more fatigued as we wake up the next day, overall changes in sleep duration. So some of us, as we age, particularly later in life, then we might see less sleep total duration. And then questions of why is this? I used to get fill in the blank, 8 hours, 9 hours, what have you. And then it starts to go down 7, 6, and then questions of, is that sufficient? Is that enough sleep? But also just that sleep fragmentation, those wake ups, we know that can often impact how we feel the next day. And there's a fine line between natural and understandable wake ups that just happen that are healthy and normal, and then a kind of disordered number of wake ups or things that we might want to do to get at the source of those.
Okay, there were two things I want to bring up, because it sounded like there's some healthy and normal sleep awakening. So I want to know about that. But before you do talk about that, I want to talk a little bit more about the sleep apnea, because when we discussed this in our first podcast, and I was just the typical person who thought, oh, that's just an overweight older man who has these issues. It's a stereotype. And you said that you'd actually just got back from a conference and they were saying, no, actually lean women and women getting older actually have a lot of sleep apnea. And it's an issue that was trying to bring more awareness to. So the other thing is, I imagine a lot of women listening go, well, trouble breathing and sleep. You're like kind of unconscious when you're sleeping. You have these sort of micro awakenings. Some people are totally awake. That's fine. But I think a lot of people are unaware and unconscious of their breathing patterns in general, even when we're awake, let alone when we're asleep. And I know some of the gadgets we have, like the Oura Ring, can tell us some of our breathing patterns as well. And if so, tell us a little bit more, dive a little bit more deeper into the women's, how concerned should we be, and who are we talking to exactly? And then how do we test this to see if we're having sleep apnea?
So good. I'm so glad that you're focusing in on this, because we're also just seeing overall instances around sleep apnea across the board for all genders, for all ages, really skyrocketing, including kids. We're seeing sleep apnea really rising. So there are questions of the why. Is this at the source of the type of foods that we're having? I tend to also have us look to vitamin D and the prevalence of all of us going indoors, the numbers and percentages of the amount of time that the average person is spending inside now is just wild as compared to how it was, hundreds of years in the past, certainly before Edison, before our ability to have, light at any time. But we're finding correlations between low vitamin D and changes in the body makeup, including hormonal issues. This can all play a role into some of our hormonal imbalances, and vitamin D is a hormone. And many people forget that. But we find that actually seems to play a role in sleep apnea. So that's something to be aware of. So even just knowing, getting outside more frequently, making sure that we're testing for vitamin D levels, because many of us are wildly deficient, and that can show up in the quality of our sleep, but also in the sleep apnea piece. But to your point around women in particular, it seems that women seem to have, so it might not look like some of the call outs that you might see of, thick neck, overweight, snoring, some of these things that we might have traditionally thought. Whereas for women, it might look a little more subtle. And especially if they're not with a partner, and if they aren't having sort of like overt things where people might hear them kind of stopping breathing, or even faint snoring or any of these things. But also it can just look like, instead, waking up the next day with mild headaches. You keep feeling like you're waking up throughout the course of the night. It's annoying. You have to go to the bathroom, and you attribute it to needing to go to the bathroom or what have you, or stress, or, something in kind of gets misappropriated when the real source point was that stressor of not being able to breathe well. But then also women then having instances of things like upper airway resistance syndrome, and that can be kind of not quite sleep apnea, but you're having difficulty breathing. And so that can be massively problematic to the quality of the sleep that we're getting into. So some of those sleep stages can be disrupted. And so this is where we want to really get some, kind of resources and tools at our disposal. One thing to be aware of, some of our wearables can give us some red flags. Now, they don't necessarily act as diagnostic, of course, because they're consumer grade products. But they can signal to us, ooh, we might want to get tested. Some signs, you can see certain things like little ticks throughout the course of the night where it looks like you've just been waking up a bunch. And for some people, they don't even remember those things. And they say, well, why is it giving me all these bad scores throughout the course of the night? Like I felt like I was sleeping. Or some people do remember them, or the longer ones. But so a lot of those ticks of awake time throughout the course of the night could be a sign that it might be worth getting tested. Restlessness, like if you're having a lot of movement throughout the course of the night, that could be something to call out. Some changes in heart rate. So we can see heart rate throughout the course of the night. We're seeing some of these major spikes that can be indicative of sort of that stress response. Now, there can be many reasons for heart rate spikes, but could be a sign. And then you can get things like Snore Lab, which is a free app that can measure the audible piece, because certainly snoring is unequivocally connected with sleep apnea. So that if that is present, then we absolutely have a lot of urgency to get tested. And what are some other things you can get tested with? One would be LAFTA. It's an online resource around about $200 US dollars to get just a test sent at home. So you don't have to go anywhere. And it's sent really quickly. You can test really quickly and get your results really quickly. So that's really helpful. Empower Sleep is another one. Now, I know these are kind of US centric, but if outside of the US, then you can certainly work with your doctor most often to even be tested through your doctor and getting those referrals in lab, or more and more places are giving you at home tests to also do. And most of those are super easy, kind of just throw those on. And those can be really noteworthy. And I did want to correct myself because I realized I said 10 pounds, and it's 10% increase in body weight that can make you 6 times more likely to have OSA. So big disclaimer, big call out, that is out of the Sleep Foundation. So I wanted to make sure I didn't alarm anyone because I realized I said pounds instead of percentage. So the important call out, I don't want to scare anyone there, but that's still alarming too. 10%, six times more likely. That's out of the Sleep Foundation.
Yeah. I mean, if you're, I don't know, 120, 130 pounds, that's 12, 13 pounds. I mean, it's not that far from what you just said, but Okay, describe you're talking about these little at-home gadgets, devices. What does that look like? You said it's like $200. It's something you strap on your body
Great
or
questions. Okay, so one of my favorites is the Sleep Image ring, and it's a ring that you put on a little bit bigger than an Oura ring. And I think we both have our Oura rings on. So it's a little bit bigger than the Oura ring. They're also utilizing HRV to get you a little bit of information around what's going on as far as your sleep quality as well. But certainly they are cleared, FDA cleared, to be a medical grade diagnostic for sleep apnea. So they're one that comes from Empower Sleep, and they're available through doctors and what have you. So that can be a really easy one. So you just throw that on, go to sleep like normal. Some of the other ones are Watch Pat, and so it's kind of acts a bit more like a watch almost in little connections, but super easy. So you just throw these on, and I think that's what's helping a lot of people to feel more at ease about doing some of these, because they might have felt like, oh, I'm not going to sleep, I've been being watched in an in lab. Another one is Wesper, and Wesper has sort of a patch like option. And so you can put this patch on, and that will give information around things like your snoring, your movement throughout the course of the night. And then you get to speak with a sleep professional there to go over that. And if it looks like you have sleep apnea, then they'll send you a watch pat. And so, but then you can have kind of a person to be interacting with around these questions as well. Same with Empower Sleep. So you're able to go over your results with a sleep doctor. So all of these are helpful. So you're not just kind of on your own. Same with Lofta, a little bit different as far as the doctor piece. You're reviewing them with some of their staff, but makes it really easy.
okay. I'm not taking notes and writing all these names down. So do you have this in your shop or somewhere? Can you give us a
Yes,
list or something we can have in the show
totally.
notes?
Yes, absolutely. I can provide you too for the show notes too. So if that's easiest for people to kind of click down. And I have no affiliation with these because they're medical devices. So they're, just things that I think are really important for people to be aware of to make this all easy. Now, and I will also say that through your doctor, I do have a lot of people that are like, I just want to, I pay for insurance. So I want to pay, I don't want to have to pay extra. Now this might take a little bit longer, full disclosure, but you can certainly go through your doctor and have them either send you an at-home option or do it in lab. In lab can be important for other concerns beyond sleep apnea. And there are certainly, dozens and dozens of sleep disorders that could be lurking and being undiagnosed. So other examples, restless leg, narcolepsy, bruxism, other things that could be present that we might not have any awareness of, but in lab could be helpful, especially if you want to get more information around what's going on with your sleep stages, because anything that's on the brain, so getting that EEG readout can be really noteworthy to get more information about the quality of our sleep versus, Oura is trying to do as best as it can. Same with Whoop and Apple and all these things. They're really doing a great job, and they continue to get more and more accurate. However, that's one of the areas that they can't get quite as accurate because they're not touching the brain-based information around what exactly is your brain looking like throughout those different sleep stages.
One question that popped in my mind is you mentioned snoring is one of the clues to perhaps you have sleep apnea. What is the percentage of people who snore who have sleep apnea? Do we know what the probabilities are?
So it's hard to break that down, especially since we're seeing changes around some of the instances. So more and more people are having sleep apnea, and that's where that question, the chicken or the egg type call out, is coming out around what is kind of causing this. Are we getting better at, spotting it, or is there truly just so many more cases of this? But we do have people that do seem to, they might snore a little bit, but they're not quite qualifying for full-blown sleep apnea. Now, this is where it gets a little nuanced and frustrating because depending on who you go with, there can be different kind of grades and ranking systems to decide what to do with your sleep apnea. So ideally, you want to make sure that you're going with a practitioner that's really on more the cutting edge. And I say that because in the past, it was kind of like, sadly, some of these companies were looking to sell you a CPAP because that was where a lot of money was coming from. And if you didn't reach, if you weren't full blown, hardcore sleep apnea sufferer enough to warrant a CPAP, then it was sort of like, bye. Whereas now there are different groups of criteria that more modern practitioners will also say, okay, so you're not a good candidate for CPAP, but we've got all these different things that could be supportive for you. Like one thing I think I might have mentioned to you, maybe in previous conversations, maybe not, was things like Excite OSA. And it's this new product over the last couple years that is FDA cleared to treat snoring and sleep apnea. And it's a daytime treatment. And so that's something that's available, but a lot of people don't even realize that exists. That's one item. There's oral appliance inserts, things that you can use to help manage some of that snoring, even though snoring doesn't fully qualify for sleep apnea. That can be helpful for airway and otherwise, but also things for the nose, for if the snoring that you're dealing with is that nasal-based snoring. There's just a lot of things that we can do to support respiratory issues throughout the course of the night. Also, it's important to remember from both a psychological and physiological aspect, how you are by day gets mirrored in the nights. So if you're someone that's really shallow breathing, having a hard time breathing throughout the course of the day, or dealing with allergies or all these other problems, then it's likely you're going to be dealing with many of those things throughout the course of the night, if not more aggravated in some cases. So we want to make sure that we're addressing that, because that can impact your ability to get into some of those deep levels of sleep staging. And then when you do get pulled out of that, because you've gotten awakened, then you have to go back through all those stages again. So it's just really inefficient sleep. One cool thing is that there's something that's kind of being put together called your sleep age. You know how you can test for our biological versus chronological age nowadays, and that's like a fun thing. Well, now there's what's being put together of being able to test for your sleep age. So you would get your sleeping would be kind of tracked, and then using AI, we get a sense of, is this, even if you're, say, a 30-year-old, you might be sleeping like a 72-year-old, or you might be, hopefully, because you've been listening to Zora and what have you, you're in your whatever 50s and you're sleeping like a 20-year-old or something, is hopefully what's going on. But sadly, for many people, they're sleeping in an older way. What would some of the characteristics of older sleep be? Particularly fragmented sleep. That's one of the things we find a lot, just a lot of fragmentation, and that looks like an older pattern for sleep. So we want to try to interrupt some of that, no pun intended.
Oh, super interesting. So we talked about the sleep apnea, which I think a lot of us need to be more aware of. We mentioned some of the solutions. You said CPAP. CPAP is one of these devices. I mean, it actually looks really uncomfortable. I don't know how people sleep with that, but the ones I know who have it, they're like, wow, great sleep now. But it's a device like you put over your mouth, and it seems pretty bulky. And then you said the one about your put in your mouth, and then there's the breathing. And I'm a breathing coach, and so I'm so glad you mentioned that, because we always talk about, at least I was trained in the Oxygen Advantage, and this is functional breathing, basically teaching people how to breathe all throughout the day, right? Not just when you are doing some yoga class, but when you're doing exercise and all that. And we always say the same thing is how you breathe in your sleep is very much a reflection of how you're breathing during the day. So that we can control. If we just learn how to breathe in the day, you're more likely to be having that under control at night. So these are some great solutions. And I think, and you also gave some clues, which is, some of the snoring and some of the awakenings. Did you say dry? I don't know if you said dry mouth.
Oh, yes. Dry mouth, headaches. Yep. So just waking up in the morning with early morning headaches can be definitely a sign. And then certainly just feeling abnormal levels of fatigue. And I know that can plague many of us, particularly in different seasons of our life. So it can be hard to get to the root of, is it because of the sleep? Is it hormonal? Is it, a whole slew of those things? But certainly I am of the estimation that you want to begin with your sleep. It's the most important kind of place to begin for our ability to restore throughout the course of our certainly night into our next day, but can support this hormonal balance and energy that we're looking to create, and the mission that you're fulfilling on. I'm so happy that you really put such importance onto this area because it is so crucial for all of our goals that we're looking to fulfill on. And I happen to be of the belief that, all of the things, and I got a lot of biohackery products and gadgets and all of that. But half the time, then the prioritization and then the skill set learning around sleep can make some of the biggest difference for people from a measurable perspective to then have this foundation ironed out, consistently.
Okay, we really covered sleep apnea, but there's so many other things. And actually what I think you're getting, what you've really trying to explain is that some of the reasons women are waking up in the middle of the night, they can't fall asleep again, these 2 a.m. wakings, this could be due to sleep apnea. What are some of the other causes of these disruptions, this fragmented sleep as well? Is there anything else in the context of a woman going through menopause?
Yes, totally. So one, the hot flashes call out, and just that temperature fluctuation can be so problematic for our wake ups, because even if we aren't dealing with that, if we're, different parts throughout our lives and that's not present, that can certainly wake us up, let alone then dealing with hot flashes. That can certainly be a huge, huge factor. I will say that if available for people in their budget, is bringing in some of the cooling mattress toppers can be so helpful for this problem. Now, of course, it is an investment, and it is something that you can't necessarily travel with. And I know you're traveling a lot, and there's going to be certain concerns with that for sure. But I will say that it's something that I've seen so many people, as they do start to navigate through more of these hot flashes, that it can be something environmental that can make a difference. And beyond that, it's a lot of this harkens back to ways in which we would have likely slept more akin to ancestral days. And if we would have slept on the ground, which would have been one of the coolest places in the environment, it's very different than our kind of insulated, often foam mattresses or big duvets that have us just like cooking in like a little rotisserie chicken in there all night long. And then that heat can be super problematic for wake ups. So it's one of the easiest ways, for now. We've accumulated this huge database of Oura Ring users. So we get to see a lot of the things that can really over time improve sleep, but also on more of an immediacy basis. And one of the few things that I see that people bring in that can make a change literally almost overnight is bringing in these cooling mattress toppers, particularly for women that now are dealing with some of that temperature fluctuation. And even if it's not hot flashes, if they're going through different stages of their cycle, if they are still menstruating age, then that can be really helpful too, because then they can deal with that when they would be having a rise in body temperature. They can actually change the temperature in their space to kind of facilitate being able to cool the environment and for their physiological changes.
Oh, you're spot on with the hot flashes and the night sweats,
Ugh.
because that could be a major disruptor. And what about insomnia? People who have insomnia, these people can't even get to sleep, period. And this is not unusual among the menopausal community. So what are some of the reasons why someone may be in this age category have insomnia, and how can they overcome that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so a couple of things. One, I'll share some things that people can do that can make a difference, behaviorally, and then also a couple more out of the box things that are noteworthy that I'm coming across right now. It's actually kind of testing. So one would be, I do, I know I alluded to this vitamin D call out, but I don't think most of us realize how much of a disservice we're doing for ourselves as we go more and more indoors, and we have decades upon decades now of how we're existing that is vitamin D deficient, but also just deficient of the bright days, dark nights, and how that is playing a role in this insomnia piece. So we actually, there's just recently a preprint that came out and having around 250 circadian scientists calling for warning labels on light bulbs when used at night. So 250 circadian scientists, their whole careers are riding, on kind of making these proclamations. And they're saying this because they're finding that when people are simply using light bulbs at night, that we're seeing way high instances go up of things like cancer, particularly breast cancer, huge one that we know is circadian, seems to be quite circadian linked. So breast cancer and prostate cancer are the two of the big clear ones, but then there are many other ones. Diabetes, so metabolic dysfunction, mental health, and sleep-wake dysfunction. So your ability to both fall asleep, stay asleep, and avoid early morning awakenings. So all of those things are coming just simply from using plain old light bulbs at night. So what I'd love to put in for people is that, because one of the things that we see happen too is then as we age, if we've been having those type of environments for so long, that can impact kind of our sleep switches, if you will, and the ability for us to switch on, switch off with ease and reliability and count-onableness, that we can do that if we keep behaving like this for decades and decades, and then we get to more of those challenging season of life around as we're navigating through perimenopause, menopause, post-menopause, then that can be really problematic. So I think one of the things that we want to remember, we had a NASA subject matter expert on the podcast who called out that for the average person globally, the average person is spending their days 3 times too dark, and then their nights 3 times too light.
Oh,
so
wow.
with that, and that's I've heard from then other experts maybe being very conservative. So there's other experts that even put it more closely to 100x too dark, because now why would we say that? That's because the average indoor environment is kind of comes out to around 500 to maybe 800 lux most often. It's usually below 1,000 lux. Whereas on a sunny summer day, it can get to up to 100,000 lux outside. So if we are consistently in such a disparity of the amount of bright light that we're exposed to, we have no freaking clue what that's doing to us. And all we see is the fallout, which is this epidemic of sleep dysfunction. So that's on the front half of the day. That also helps inoculate you against the effects of being exposed to bright lights at night. So the more bright light you get, the less sensitive you're going to be to the exposure of bright lights at night. But ideally, you get all that bright light and then you're in close to total darkness in the evening. Now, I know most of us aren't going to do that, and I don't even do that. I do a lot of red lights. So can you switch over to more red or amber lights in the evening, or if you want to get like romantic-y candles, fireplace, but the difference that in and of itself can make, because that can boost measurably the amount of melatonin you're producing. And that can help facilitate your ability to fall asleep with ease, stay asleep, and avoid those early morning awakenings, which that really sums up what insomnia is: difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, or early morning awakenings. So I think that's a huge part of the puzzle. And that also informs your brain function, because if you're having more of that natural melatonin that's getting released in the hours before bed, that's lowering your heart rate. It's kind of slowing your brain activity. It's down regulating you, so you don't have to do a million meditations and all these fancy things, apps and calming yourself and all this stuff, because you don't need to, because it's just going to happen because we're designed to do that. So I think what happens is when we live in this upside down world, then we have to try to force sleep to come, and that's never been part of the design.
So the recommendation would be get outside more, get your 100,000 lux of bright sunlight into your eyeballs, and try to keep the lights low and dim at home after dark. Is there a prescription of like how much is a minimum we should be getting outdoors to try to reverse some of the damage and get better sleep and avoid insomnia and all that?
Yeah. So, I mean, this gets so layered, and I think I'm convinced that this is going to be one of the next big things in wellness, is understanding of circadian health, our kind of the physics of this type of light. Because it would be so easy if we could be like, oh, everyone should just be outside for 20 minutes and blah, blah. But instead, it depends on what time of year it is, where we are on the globe, and then certain things around our health markers, because it turns out that melatonin is produced not just from the pituitary gland, which we always, kind of thought for so long, but it's only been kind of in recent years, and still many people don't realize that it's also produced from mitochondria. And so this is where, prioritizing mitochondrial health comes into play. So you can improve some of that mitochondrial health by getting some of that sunlight exposure within reason, of course. But then if you are in northern latitude locations where the sun is stretching across the horizon, say in the winter months, then it's not going to be as powerful. So the bad news insight there is that if you're up in Canada in December, then you actually want to be outside longer than you would normally because the sun is not as powerful. And then you can also get some of the benefits of cold therapy, which can help boost that mitochondria and then produce more melatonin. So if you're in a northern latitude location, one of the things that you can do to supplement your loss of that bright light exposure is get more cold therapy, utilize more cold therapy, be outside, embrace that a bit more to boost that kind of brown fat. And that mitochondrial health can support this melatonin, the circadian health, and other benefits that mitochondria can bring. Because certainly sleep is an active process. And if you don't have, your battery of your cells kind of in order, that can be problematic for the quality of your sleep.
So give us 2 or 3 examples of what women can do in terms of cold therapy that's practical.
Yeah, absolutely. So the cold therapy piece, well, one, I would say the most practical is because I'll have so many people, probably one of the more common things I hear is, and I get it, I lived up in Maine grew up in Maine, very cold, went to school at Syracuse, very cold and snowy. So I understand the struggles, but one of the most practical is you're waking up around 7 days a week around the same time, including your weekends, because that's one of the more common reasons that you have wake ups as well is kind of this rotation of your wake up times, your sleep times, and all that movement can confuse your circadian rhythm. So now you're waking up at around the same time, 7 days a week, and you're pairing that with bright light exposure, but you're getting outside. It's not just inside or with a light box, although, that can be helpful to have in some worst case situations. But most of the time you're pairing that same, so you get up at 7 a.m. So you're getting yourself outside shortly thereafter, getting that exposure to bright light. But in the wintertime, it's cold. And that's when people say, I don't want to go outside. It's too cold.
And it's dark at 7 a.m.
And depending on where you might be, then you might have to be falling into, it's like 7:30 or what have you, when the sun is rising. So you're going out there, you're getting that sunlight. Particularly when it's rising, that's when that pinky hue is even more important because that has infrared light present. And so many of us biohackers are running around buying like the red lights and what have you, which are great, but you can also get free infrared light in those morning and evening hours of sunset. So you're getting yourself exposed to that even during the cold and kind of embracing that cold therapy that's built in during those times. So that would be a very practical way. And then another way to get in cold therapy, certainly, there's cold tubs and showers and what have you, but the very practical way can even just be turning on your tub to the coldest setting, and that still would be beneficial even without all the ice and all of that stuff. It could be a way to kind of work our way into this. But I would call out that this can also be a stressor akin to the same way exercise can be. So there might be some call outs for cycle syncing of where you might be putting those stressors like cold therapy. So maybe that's not the time to do it if you are of menstruating age. If you are going through luteal and you're more stressed, you might want to put that into the first half of your cycle.
What's the difference in impact with, say, cold showers before bed or hot bath before bed?
Ooh, so good. It's one of my favorite questions because I often see people kind of doing them upside down. Now, there's a lot of nuance here and still more studies need to be done to get more clarity because there are these call-outs where some people will share, oh, I have amazing deep sleep post a cold bath, in the evening or whatever. But for overall, for the general wisdom, it's that you'd want to have heat therapy by night, which feels intuitive but the reason for that would be heat therapy by night because then you get the paradoxical cooling effect thereafter. And because the body now, after having been this heating up happening on the skin, then it's going to almost overcorrect to cool you back down. And it will actually bring you, especially the core, becomes cooler than it would have been without that intervention of that cold therapy. So that's why it can be really helpful to have cold, a hot shower, to have a hot bath, sauna, etc. before bed, but still allowing enough of a buffer time to cool down thereafter, because there's going to be that blip in heat. But then if you give yourself enough of that time to cool down, then that can be really helpful for initiating that sleep onset call out, because the body needs to drop around 2 to 3 degrees in order to transition over to the sleep onset piece. And that can help kind of trigger that.
So I'm wondering, we know that some women, not all, but there are many who say they have triggers for hot flashes, and that could be spicy food or hot coffee or hot tea. So I'm wondering if you know anything about having a hot bath. Would that be a trigger for a hot flash?
Yeah, good question. So I have seen really some case by case elements here. And I have seen for some people too that might be dealing with, say, glucose instability. And then we have continuous glucose monitors on them. And for during the period when things are not fully functioning to the way we'd like to get them, we're still kind of healing certain things, then even hot showers can bring about glucose spikes for some people. So to your point, that bioindividuality is there. So I definitely test some of that. And I have seen some people do better with, warm showers, kind of a gentle approach to this, kind of a nice, gentle, warm bath, be a ways to get some of that heat therapy in. Of course, there's going to be certain call outs too. If you're going through certain Herxheimer reactions, if you're dealing with Lyme and mold and, you're detoxing, then there might be times where you might want to pause on some of this. So testing, and that's where the wearables can really shine, because we can see what's going on with your heart rate, with your HRV throughout the course of the day now, especially since many of them have those daytime monitors. You can see what's going on actively, and then even for your subsequent sleep. So that would be about the heat. And then for the cold therapy, if we're bringing in any of that, or even just being cold, exposed to some ambient cold temperatures, is simply going outside more often, even when it's cool out. That can be a form of very gentle, cold therapy, because we've kind of gotten a little soft nowadays in our modern society, where we're just in this perfectly, temperature controlled environment. And God forbid we get, a little chilly. It can be really important for us, and we don't realize how important that can be. And we've gotten so far away from it. So that could be really, really powerful. Now, but ideally we'd put some of that cold therapy a bit on the front half of the day, because then thereafter we seem to find this warming effect, a paradoxical warming effect, and sort of that excitatory effect of that dopamine hit.
So when Molly says to go outside and get a little cold therapy, we're talking about not wearing your parka and your hats and like duveting yourself up. Don't get frostbite. Don't get
yes,
shirtless.
Manage your safety accordingly, of course. But yes,
you want to feel a little chill. And so these are great tips. And I want to break down a little bit the hormonal piece. We've only got like 5 minutes left. Can you explain some of the hormonal relationships that women are having with their sleep disruptions, whether it be awakenings or difficulty falling asleep or the apnea, etc.?
Yeah. So, well, one, certainly, of course, from a hormone perspective, that melatonin piece is one of the more cited hormones that many people say, oh, it seems to deplete as we get older. And that's been certainly very called out, and seems to be substantiated that we seem to, for many people, lower the amount of hormone of the production of melatonin that we're creating in the evening. But I would also question if there is some of that kind of environmental and behavioral elements at play that are causing that disruption in the hormones. And because it's so crucial for our sleep-wake cycle, I believe that that is one of the pieces of the puzzle to begin with, for then looking at our sex hormones, or some doctors call them your life hormones, because it's beyond just that. They're so crucial. And then, of course, you can't talk about sex hormones and sleep without touching on progesterone. And so for so many women, then we see sadly, just, the disruption of these hormones. And then when the missing comes of the reliable production of particularly progesterone for sleep, that can be very problematic, as we know. So then some people will choose to supplement with that. So that can be an approach that some people can take. And I would say testing for these things, of course, and I know my understanding is that you're quite an advocate, of course, for doing that routinely. And so that we can be abreast of what is going on, kind of the hormonal mapping, and seeing have there been some major changes? And so then how are we going to tackle that? And that can become a bigger conversation.
We have to mention progesterone because too many women I speak to and in our community have incredible sleep with supplementing with progesterone. And this is obviously, you have to talk to your doctor, and testing is really hard in this period of life in perimenopause because your hormones are going up and down. You test them in the morning, and then the evening they're totally different, one day to the next. So there are a lot of doctors who say, nah, I'm not going to do it. The other option is urine testing, the Dutch test, for example, and that's very expensive, but maybe worth it if you kind of want to know where you're going to be. But usually progesterone, when a woman is going through perimenopause and this transition, she would take it at night because there is a lot of feedback that it does help with sleep. So please, if you are taking progesterone, take it at night.
Yeah,
that should help
definitely to benefit for that sleep piece that you're speaking to, just so crucial for our game of balancing these hormones, of being able to, really minimize some of the impact of some of these symptoms that so many people then are having to navigate through, and how the amplitude by which you're experiencing these symptoms can really be helped and supported by prioritizing first this sleep piece.
Okay. 2 quick questions. We've only got 4 minutes left. 1, what is your favorite sleep gadget?
Oh, you know what? You just reminded me that I was going to touch on this and then got away from it. Well, I would say the most obvious one is the Oura Ring, just because I have everyone wearing that. So I just think it's a great place to begin. But one of the things I was going to mention about just, the ability to fall asleep and stay asleep, and something that I'm testing now, and I have no affiliation with this company, but noteworthy, is the Somni. And it's you use it for about 15 minutes before bed, and it's using transcranial electric stimulation. So it's kind of noteworthy. And it also has Dr. Matthew Walker on the as part of the science advisor for the company. So that's interesting. I just got to tour their labs in Berkeley just recently, their sleep labs, and they've been going to work for years on looking at, some of the results. And so they just were published in Frontiers, and they found that on average, it was 4 times more effective than melatonin, 2 times more effective than CBTI, and 1.5 times more effective than Ambien in putting people to sleep as far as sleep onset, but also sleep quality and sleep duration. So it's kind of an interesting call out. So I'm testing it right now actively, and it's learning about you using AI. So it's seeing if your brain is more activated at certain times, and then applying a different set of stimulation to support that.
Okay. 1 more minute. So I want to mention your newsletters. I usually unsubscribe from them, most of them after a few weeks or months, but yours is still going strong for several years now. And I really do look forward to them. So it just feels like you're nearby, right, when I open it. And you send them out every Monday, right? So
yes.
Hey, nonstop. You're really on top of the science and that cutting edge technology, and learn so much. And that's why I included you as one of my guest speakers in my menopause programs. So, which anyone can sign up to at any time, right? There's a selfish plug here, but seriously, everyone go and subscribe to Molly's newsletter at sleepisaskill.com, and you'll be just as informed as I am. But you also have sleep programs, so where you really take a deep dive into someone's sleep issues and resolve them. Do you want to talk a little bit about the program before I let you go?
Yeah, well, one, thank you so much for the kind words about the newsletter. That means so much. And yeah, for anyone that signs up, please interact. Let me, I respond to every email. It might just take me a minute, but I always respond. So would love to have you. And then as far as our programs, well, certainly we have our podcast, so free offerings there. The newsletters, free offerings, social media, we're trying to do more, the forever thing. And then, but if you are struggling, then we do have options where you can kind of dive in with more vigor. So all of them do require the Oura Ring to participate, but we have things like Oura Ring audits. So we can audit your stats and then give you some kind of tailored advice on things that you can bring in, as well as online cohorts and then one-on-ones too, but you're all being tracked with those wearables throughout the whole course of that time. And that can be really transformative for people.
Perfect. I'm going to have links to all of this, your Instagram, your Facebook, your website, sleepisaskill.com, your YouTube. You got everything in the show notes, and you got a free sleep optimization. I think there's a PDF or something. I know that's
yes.
the optimized
Free.
bedroom.
Yes, exactly. The optimized bedrooms. So that's for free. So that will have 17 high-tech, low-tech ways that you can optimize your sleep. So you can get that on sleepisaskill.com. And then I think, yeah, we might have given that to you too. So it might be in the show notes as well. Different ways to get that. Yeah, would love to have you download that and use that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Molly. I'm so grateful. I know you got to run. Any last words for a woman going through menopause, this transition that you have for her?
Oh, yeah. Well, one, knowledge is power. So I really believe sleep is a skill, and that no matter if you've identified as a poor sleeper or you were a great sleeper and then menopause happened or whatever the narrative might be, that we can absolutely interrupt that narrative and we can up level your results no matter where you're at, because it truly is a skill.
Thank you, Molly. Letting you go. Have a wonderful
Oh,
day. Oh, yeah.
thank
Good night for
you.
anyone else who's listening. And I will see you again. We'll have another part 2 because I've got so many
Woohoo.
more questions.
Oh, I love that. All right. Thanks so much. Bye.